In the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, one of the biggest and best laid out cities is that of Skingrad. It is located on the west weald of Colovia in the southwest region of Cyrodiil. It has 3 districts within the city itself: Chapel, Hightown, and the Castle. It is divided by a road leading west to east which connects the south side and north side by 2 bridges. The architecture and layout involves the use of cobblestone, which truly adds to the medieval fantasy feel. There is plenty to admire within this great city, but upon first arrival, that awe factor quickly gets cut short. Making your way into the town, the player might notice something while simply just wandering around. They are actually being followed. A male wood elf in commoner clothing is trailing them from a distance and sometimes might even run up close. When confronted, he may or may not play coy and act as if nothing is going on. Or he may act completely strange as if he wishes to tell the player something but quickly decides against it. All in all, it's strange behavior and the player can clearly tell that something isn't right. Finally, he will engage with the player after whispering over to you and attempt to grab your attention. He says,
"Yes, you. We need to talk. Yes. We can't talk here. Too public. Meet me behind the great chapel at midnight. Don't let anyone follow you. I'll make it worth your while."
This is when the quest titled Paranoia officially begins. The player is unsure what to make of the conversation that just transpired. A strange bossmer named Glarthir approached you and told you to meet him behind the Great Chapel at midnight. There are many different ways that the 12 AM meeting could go down, and a lot of them involve sinister motives that could be plotted against you. What did Glarthir mean that it's too public of an area to talk? Why should you watch for people following you? And in what way will he make it worth our while? The only way to receive answers to any of these questions is to head back to the chapel at midnight. The old day ends and the new one begins, making it a sign to the player that it's time. Running to the south side of the city, the Great Chapel sits there in silence, as all the player can hear is the occasional clinking of the city guard walking their route. Sure enough, standing in the shadows is the strange and eccentric wood elf Glarthir. Upon approaching him, he has this to say.
"Ah, you came. You're sure you weren't followed? Good. I thought I could trust you. Nobody else in town. They're all in on it. All watching me. Well, yes, I need you to do something for me. I'll pay you gold. You like gold, don't you? Lots of gold. Here's my problem. I'm being followed. Watched. Marukotti selectives, maybe. Not sure. I'm a threat, you see, to their plans. I know too much. I need you to check out some people for me. The ones who are following me. Watch them. See where they go. Who they report to. Will you help me? Very good. You won't be sorry. I'll pay you well. Did I say that already? Let's start with Bernadette Penniless. Be outside my house at 6 a.m. You'll see her watching me. See where she goes and who she reports to. We'll meet here again tomorrow night. Oh, and never contact me in public. They're watching. They can't know you're helping me. Her house is almost directly across the street from mine, southwest of the Great Chapel. Coincidence? I don't think so.
Glarthir believes he is being followed and watched by several citizens of Skingrad. He enlists the player's help in order to get to the bottom of it. If the player agrees, the first task is to watch Bernadette Penniless. She is his neighbor and reportedly leaves her house at 6 a.m. It is here that the player will stand watch and keep an eye on her every move. Bernadette could be doing a number of different things on any given day. This particular day saw her make her way to the chapel for a morning prayer. She was likely only here for 30 in-game minutes, and soon after, left for Tamika's vineyards outside of the city where she plowed the fields for the rest of the day. Sleuthing around her house and in her belongings saw no results, as there wasn't anything particularly suspicious hidden away or in plain sight. Upon talking to Bernadette and asking her about Glarthir, she will need to be bribed or persuaded to give the player an answer. She has this to say about him.
Was that... Well, I know he's a bit odd, but I've always thought he was kind of sweet. Lately, though, he has been stranger than usual. I think maybe he's been following me. I see him every morning on my way to chapel. I've tried to say hello, but he always pretends not to hear me.
At this point, there is no evidence that the player can truly find that points to her being guilty of following and spying on Glarthir. On this particular day, she went to the chapel and worked in the vineyards. Speaking to her about him yielded no telling results either. It's at this point that a member of the city guard, Dion, will approach the player saying this.
A little bird told me that you've been asking around town about Glarthir, a resident eccentric. I'd like to know why. Let me give you some advice. Glarthir is crazy. So far, harmless crazy. But I keep an eye on him because it's my job to. You don't want to get involved with him. I don't care how much he's paying you, it isn't worth it. Like I said, he's crazy. Since you are courteous enough to tell the truth, I'll do the same by trusting you to talk to a guard if he asks you to do anything strange.
It seems like Glarthir has a strong reputation around the city for his paranoia and specific outward energy. Dion mentions that if anything should escalate or become cautious with Glarthir, we shouldn't hesitate to tell the city guard. For now, the only thing the player can do is meet again with the Bosmer at midnight behind the chapel. Hours pass, the sun falls, and the moons rise. Once again, it's time to meet with the fidgety, mistrustful wood elf in the cover of night. It's important to note that this quest actually has a lot of different pathways that lead to different outcomes. The one currently being shown will demonstrate the path of lying to Glarthir about what the player has found. The conversation goes like this.
So, you saw Bernadette penniless, did you? She was watching me and following me, wasn't she? Just as I thought! Just as I thought! Excellent work. There will be a bonus in this for you, don't worry. Ah, of course. The gold. Here. But there is someone else I need you to investigate. Toutius Sextius. Do you know him? A quiet fellow. Appears harmless enough. But I've identified him as one of my key suspects. He's a clever one, no doubt about it. Eyes in the back of his head. Always seems to know when I'm watching. But that's where you come in. You should wait outside his house and see what he does when he's not watching me. I'll meet you here tomorrow night to get your report. He lives in the large house between the Low Gate and the East Bridge. Alone. Suspicious, don't you think?
Glarthir was pleased with the player's intel on Bernadette, even though it was technically untrue. However, he took the information at face value and still paid you for your work. He tasked the player with another investigation mission, this time following around and looking into the resident by the name of Toutius Sextius. Toutius, unlike Bernadette, lives on the other side of town and is in fact not a neighbor to Glarthir. The journal entry and information given to you about him is less detailed than Bernadette's was, but is still fairly straightforward. His day begins at 6 AM and goes from there. On this particular day, Toutius did not leave his house at all, making the spying part easy, however the searching through his belongings part a little more difficult. When confronted about Glarthir, he had this to say.
You're new here, or you'd know me. Toutius Sextius, my people have lived in Skingrad since the dawn. Father and the Count were best of friends. I'm sorry, but I don't think I know any Glarthir. Oh, wait, do you mean that strange wood elf that you see wandering around the city? Yes, I've seen him, but never spoken to him. He seems to be at the Low Gate every morning when I pass by on my way to the castle. Gives me the strangest looks now that you mention it. Almost like he hates me, although I have no idea why. Yes, the strange wood elf who haunts the Low Gate every morning. You said he was Glarthir. Well, I'm afraid I know nothing else about the fellow.
This was a fairly similar response to the one given by Bernadette. Both her and Toutius barely know Glarthir, and it seems like these small encounters they have had with him, in which Glarthir mistakes for stalking, are actually brought on by Glarthir being the one to watch their every move. Looking around Toutius' house, he has nothing particular that stands out as being suspicious. The sleuthing had to be done while he was asleep, as he does follow the player around when it comes time to lock up the house for the night. With no paper trails or evidence of him conspiring against Glarthir, as well as him having been home all day, the player must now wait for nightfall once again to inform Glarthir of your findings. Again, for this particular scenario, the option of lying to Glarthir will be chosen, and the dialogue surrounding it sounds like this.
Tell me what you learned about Toutius Sextius. So, I was right all along. You're doing excellent work, my friend. Here you go, my friend. Trust me, you've earned it. There is one last person that needs looking into, though. Do you know Davide Sorelli? Yes, of the famous Sorelli vineyards. Pillar of the community, etc. Who would ever suspect him? Perfect cover for the ringleader of the whole conspiracy. He watches my house constantly. You'll see. He leaves his house early each morning. Watch him and report back to me here at midnight as usual. Make sure he doesn't notice you. The Sorelli house is right next door to mine. A large house with a backyard conveniently located to observe my every move.
Glarthir yet again was pleased with the player's false intel on Toutius, and a generous reward of gold was given out. He then asks the player to do one final spy operation on another citizen of Skingrad, David Surreal. David is a co-owner of the Surreal Vineyards, and Glarthir believes he is the ringleader of the entire conspiracy against him. He too begins his day at 6 AM, and on this particular one, headed straight to the vineyards where he plowed and dug for most of it. Davide lives and works with his brother Gaston, who could be just as guilty if the theory turns out to be true. When asked about Glarthir, both Gaston and Davide had this to say.
You may have heard that he's a bit touched in the head, and that may be true, but he's always been a quiet neighbor, never given us any trouble.
Both of these responses continue to be consistent with what everyone else has to say about Glarthir. He's an odd, eccentric, paranoid Bosmer, yet for the most part, seemingly keeps to himself and stays away from most people. The Surreal house is located fairly close to Glarthir's and is locked up pretty tight throughout most of the day. There are opportunities to break in and look around, however the brothers frequently come in and out of the manor and might catch the player. Looking through their belongings and personal chests, there really isn't much for the player to go off of. Seemingly too, the brothers have had no interaction with Glarthir on this particular day, making it apparent that they in fact may not be involved in a conspiracy against him. In what could be the final time, the player waits for midnight to tell Glarthir about their findings. This continues to be the scenario where the player lies to Glarthir about these citizens in question. When encountering Glarthir again behind the chapel, he has this to say.
So, what did you discover about the upstanding Davide Surreal? And so it all falls into place. Yes, it all makes sense now. Here, this is your last task. Here's the gold, as promised. I always pay my debts, and then some. Do the last task in that note, and I will pay you much, much more.
Through lying all 3 times to Glarthir about if anyone is following him, more gold has been paid out, and it has led to the final task for the player to embark on. Glarthir has drafted up a list which includes all 3 individuals in question. The list then tells the player that these people must be killed in order to end the conspiracy and for the safety of Glarthir. Continuing along with the role-playing scenario, the player will then begin entering into the houses of the 3 unsuspecting citizens and murder them in their sleep. In accordance with the list, the first person visited was Davide Surreal. whom wasn't very tough to defeat. The issue is Gaston tends to wake up when Davide is being attacked, making it either a 2-for-1 killing or resulting in the player having to run out of the house quickly. Going in reverse order, the next target would be Toutius Sextius. Toutius happens to have the most health out of all 3 individuals, resulting in most of the time spent on trying to defeat him. Fortunately, he doesn't have a weapon to fight with and made it defensively easy. He tried to run out of the house but closed the door on himself, virtually trapping him in his bedroom. After slaying him, the final mark is Bernadette Penniless. Her house is the closest to Glarthir's and is the easiest to pick the lock for. She had the least amount of health, however she will sprint out of the house when attacked, making it very easy for guards to get involved before the deed is done. The best technique is to stand in the bedroom doorway so she can't run past you, then using whatever combat method is preferred. At this point, all 3 names on the list have been taken care of, and it's time to officially meet with Glarthir one last time at midnight behind the chapel. Worth mentioning is that the guards are more than likely to come and arrest the player after each killing. All 3 murders resulted in 3 different arrests from the guards. However, the bounty is only 40 gold each time and can easily be paid off. A way to avoid the arrests is by using the cowl of the Grey Fox so that the bounty may fall on him. Chameleon and invisibility might also help the player escape the consequences as well. The player meets with Glarthir one last time for this conversation to ensue.
Have you done what I asked? Really? They're really dead? Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you! I'm free! I'm finally free! By all means, I would have paid any amount to be rid of those watching eyes, always watching me, but never again! I'm free!
It is here that the quest titled Paranoia will officially be completed, disposition with Glarthir will increase, and the gold reward will be paid out. If the player tries to contact Glarthir again, he will come up short with you and act either irritated, annoyed, or ignorant towards the player. Dion, the member of the city guard, will have no further questions or answers to give about Glarthir, almost changing his tone about him entirely. The 3 suspects have been assassinated by the player, and their homes are left vacant, except for the Surreal household if Gaston was spared. The player will then go on to other quests and adventures, leaving Glarthir to his disturbances and anxieties. This is only one of the many different outcomes that come from this quest. In theory, you can almost think of it like the bad ending. Seemingly innocent people have been killed, but the player receives a lot of gold and can loot the now vacant houses. There are a few other pathways this quest can take. Important to note is that there really isn't any evidence against Bernadette, Toutius, and Davide. While it can be up to interpretation on whether or not their little interactions with Glarthir are considered suspicious, there is seemingly not much left by the developers to prove them guilty. Now it's time to discuss the other pathways. When the player first meets with Glarthir behind the chapel, you can simply decline his offer and say you will not help him spy on the targets. It is here that Glarthir says this.
Oh, well, I understand. The danger is too great.
He then walks away from the meeting spot in the direction of his house and begins to mutter some suspicious things under his breath. They almost sound like threats and warnings to the people he asked you to spy on, saying he's been pushed too far and that he's not normally a violent person. It is here he will enter into his house and then an hour later come back out with a battle axe equipped and enter into Bernadette Penniless's house. He will head up to her bedroom and then begin attacking her. In this instance, she was lucky enough to escape from Glarthir and run out into the street. Glarthir chased her but was shot down by arrows and sword strikes from the surrounding city guard. It is here that the quest will also end. Another pathway the player can take is by telling Glarthir that all 3 targets are innocent and not spying on him. He responds with this after each meeting.
Really? That is surprising. I was sure she was watching me. Ah, of course. The gold. Here. But there is someone else I need you to investigate. Tell me what you learned about Toutius Sextius. Really? So you're saying that neither Bernadette Penniless or Toutius Sextius is part of the conspiracy against me? Hard to believe. Yes, the gold that you value so highly. I wonder what price betrayal... Never mind that. Well, we shall see. I do have one more name for you. So, what did you discover about the upstanding Davide Surly? Just as I suspected, they've gotten to you too! Not one of them involved in the conspiracy, and you expect me to believe that? Now I know for sure that they are all in on it, and therefore they all have to die, starting with you!
It is here that Glarthir will begin attacking you and make claims that you're in on the conspiracy. He can either be killed by you or the city guards, either way ending the quest yet again. There's also another pathway which sees the player making it all the way to the quest stage of having to kill any of the suspects. Now, the city guard can be notified of the murder plot and say this.
You have something you want to tell me about that nutcase? Really? He's getting worse then. Thanks for letting me know. If you think he's becoming dangerous, you come straight to me, and I'll handle it. You have something you want to tell me about that nutcase? Why? What's he done? Damn. He's finally gone completely bonkers. Thanks for the tip. Now stand aside and let the guard do their work. Spare a coin for me.
Then, they themselves will go to personally take care of Glarthir and ultimately kill him, ending the quest. Alternatively, the player can also have made it to the assassination part, but declined to participate in any of the killings. This will see Glarthir making his way to their houses on his own with his battle axe in order to finish the job by himself, likely resulting in his death and potentially the death of one of the 3 targets. The final pathway is to again make it all the way to the murder plot scenario involving the list to kill any of the 3 targets, but this time going to show each of them the list. Bernadette and Toutius will simply tell you to report it to the guards. However, Davide and Gaston will take matters into their own hands and go after Glarthir, yet again killing Glarthir and ending the quest. There are even more little specific details that can be gone over with regards to how events play out. However, these are the main pathways that lead to potentially different results. Interesting to note is that the player can simply wait 24 hours by the chapel, talk to Glarthir, and give him whatever answer you'd like on the guilty verdict of each suspect. Tailing each civilian is a completely optional thing to do for this quest. Now, on certain forums, many players have claimed that they remember at least one of the suspects actually having some form of findable evidence against them. The leading person for this is actually Davide Surreal, as multiple people have had Mandela effect-like moments remembering him doing something out of touch. Some folks have claimed it was his actions while at the vineyard, and others claim it was evidence found in his basement. Extensive searches have been done on both grounds for this video, and nothing has been found. However, there is likely a reason for these false memories, which will be gone over in just a bit. It actually could make some sense that it is Davide Surreal involved in a conspiracy against Glarthir, given that him and Gaston are the only 2 suspects to actively go out of their way to kill him when shown the note. Now it's time to answer the burning question, which is, was anyone actually following and spying on Glarthir? Sure, maybe not the 3 suspected individuals, as there's no evidence for it, but how about other people in town perhaps? After all, when the player first meets with him behind the chapel, he mentions a group called the Marocati Selectives and that he knows too much about them. Who are they and what could this possibly mean? In short, the Marocati Selectives are a group of extremists from the Elysian Order who have specific beliefs about the world. The most important thing to note about them is they really don't like the elven kind, and it honestly could stand that they might try to kill him if he does know too much information. Well, this is where the plot actually thickens. In Glarthir's house down in the basement, there are actually a bunch of notes written on a table that are essentially updates for the quest. They can be changed around a bit based off of what the player told Glarthir, but there are some that remain the same and have been written before the player even begins the quest. For example, there is an entry with regards to Davide Surreal. The entry details that Glarthir has been watching him for 5 days and has jotted his every move. When Davide speaks with Gaston, Glarthir is suspicious. When Davide goes on his own during work, Glarthir is also suspicious of this too, even noting that it appears like Davide had buried something in the ground, but when Glarthir went to look for it after, all he found was disturbed earth. It is here that this is likely what most players from the forums, as previously mentioned before, remember reading about and have confused with concrete proof against the Surreals. The brothers work on a vineyard, so of course they're going to be digging up and burying things in different plots of their land. Even something as little as whispering to each other has Glarthir set off on a whole conspiracy plot against him. Like mentioned before, there are other notes as well about Toutius and Bernadette, for example, that just detail Glarthir's suspicions. There are also notes about his expressions towards them being found guilty or not guilty, and that he is happy the player has decided to help keep an eye on them. But the most interesting note actually might have more to offer with regards to potential stalkers for Glarthir. The note reads this: current thoughts on the conspiracy. Marikati selectives, most likely. Ruthless and secretive. I have undoubtedly earned their enmity by my vigilance numerous times. The Blades, supposedly the guardians of the Empire. Question: do they know that I know their dark secret? Everything hinges on that. Mythic Dawn? Need to learn more about them. Obscure hints from various sources suggest they could be the most dangerous of the three. Question: why do they want me dead? So, there are 3 specific factions that Glarthir name drops and which could be out to get him. The first one is the Marikati Selectives, whom could actually be keeping an eye on him, especially if he has meddled in their affairs multiple times as stated in the note. The second one is the Blades, whom Glarthir claims to know a dark secret about. It's not really a characteristic of the Blades to spy on an arbitrary citizen, however, if he does know information that could put the Emperor or the faction itself in a risky spot, it certainly could be a possibility. The final faction is the Mythic Dawn. However, Glarthir just writes about them being dangerous and doesn't mention anything about knowing any information about them, or that of meddling into their affairs. This one is probably the least likely of the factions to be following him, even though there is a Mythic Dawn sleeper agent in town, else Godhater. Godhater can be found at the Westweald Inn. When asked about Glarthir, she says that she sees him in a different light than everybody else in town. She doesn't see him as an overly anxious, sweet little wood elf, but more of somebody who will eventually snap and cause harm to everyone around him. Almost as if she accurately predicted what the events of this quest were. While not necessarily confirming any animosity towards Glarthir, she isn't exactly denying any either. However, it feels more like a personal bias against him rather than the faction's thoughts and opinions on him. The most likely of explanations for the question of is anyone actually following Glarthir is no, and that he is likely paranoid. However, it's also probably for a good reason. Glarthir claims to have important information and knowledge on 2 out of the 3 factions listed. The Marikati Selectives and the Blades are certainly groups that could very well retaliate against people who will spill their secrets and plans to the public. Knowing their secrets or having already meddled into their affairs could have certainly put Glarthir in their crosshairs, and through this, he has become extremely paranoid, anxious, and overly cautious. Then, mix that with the desire to learn more about the dangerous cult of the Mythic Dawn, who most certainly would have him followed and killed if he pries too hard, must have led to the Wood Elf breaking. Another comical and ironic factor of this quest to think about is that Glarthir claims the 3 suspects are following him, keeping tabs on his every move, and are conspiring against him. This leads him to employ the player to do the exact same thing towards these 3 innocent individuals, with following them around for the day, reporting back to Glarthir, then potentially killing them in the end. This was likely an intentional thought-out plot point to the quest to show how crazy and insane Glarthir truly was, that he would go to the exact same lengths that these 3 people allegedly went to in order to receive information on their movements and daily routines, essentially creating an entire conspiracy against these 3 people and stalking them. The developers could have potentially designed it like this to see if the player would catch on and get some amusement out of the irony in the situation. The final theory regarding this quest that actually has a lot of merit to it is that this quest was designed intentionally to show off the Radiant AI features. During the early release days of Oblivion and leading up to it, Bethesda kept trying to drive home the point that NPCs would have routines and different movements depending on the day, time, and weather. The idea goes that this quest specifically has the player watching each NPC in order to understand and appreciate their revolutionary coding for what they do during the day. Some days they work in the vineyards, sometimes they stay home all day, sometimes they visit the chapel or the local inn, etc. It is through this quest that the player will truly pick up on and grasp the fact that the NPCs are more complex than they've ever been, and that it was made entirely for this showcase. For whatever reasons Paranoia was created, one thing is for sure. There are multiple endings and pathways the player can take, which will lead to different outcomes for the quest. Few quest lines are like this in the game, and this one is truly unique and interesting. Some pathways result in violence from the player, and others don't. Some involve the town guard, and some involve the citizens taking a stand against Glarthir by themselves. Either way, it's more than likely that Glarthir does have some knowledge and secrets on the previously mentioned factions. What they are though, is anyone's guess.